Welcome to the Paul Wallis channel. In these short stories of origins, I'm going to be telling some anomalous stories from the news, strange phenomena in the current day, and asking how they relate to what our ancestors had to tell us in world mythology and in our ancestral narratives. Is there any connection between what we're experiencing today and what our ancestors had to say? And I'd love to hear from you as to your experiences and your thoughts on these things. So I'll end each one of these with a question so that you can jump into the comments and we can get into a conversation. Don't forget to subscribe and click on the bell for all notifications. Brian Greene is the author of The Elegant Universe and the Fabric of the Cosmos, and he's one of a significant number of modern-day physicists who argue that parallel universes are not only possible, but also incredibly likely. But what does that mean? One analogy I find helpful is the analogy of frequencies. If you think about how water operates in our universe, water can exist as a solid, ice, as a fluid, as a liquid, water, and as steam. And the difference between those states is how fast the water is vibrating. In actual fact, all matter, all energy, all light can be described in terms of a frequency, an oscillation. And so if you think about our cosmos in that way, our universe, everything in it exists as a sequence of vibrations and frequencies. Now let's compare that with what happens when you go to your radio dial. You discover as you dial through the different frequency ranges that there are different radio channels occupying the same air. The same air is filled, if I take an example from the UK, it's filled with Radio 1. It's filled with Radio 2, Radio 3, Radio 4. It's filled with NPR, it's filled with the ABC. But the reason they're able to exist alongside each other and not interfere with one another is they're operating on different frequency bandwidths. So is it possible that our entire material universe operates on this bandwidth? And occupying the exact same space is another universe occupying this bandwidth. We would be completely unaware of each other. Think about if you've got a pet cat, you will know that a cat's eyes picks up a different bandwidth of light to ours. We see this bandwidth, a cat sees this bandwidth, and that's why we can see things cats can't see. Try and get them to look at your phone with you, and why cats can see things we can't see, because there's stuff in our space operating at different frequencies of light. Well, what if our entire universe is operating in this bandwidth and occupying the same space is a universe occupying this bandwidth? That's a framework for understanding how you might have adjacent universes occupying the same space. Well, is there anything in our world mythologies, in our ancestral narratives, that relates to that way of thinking? Yes, there is. When European settlers first started arriving in Australia, they listened to the stories of the dream time told by the original Australians. And as they listened, it was a little bit confusing because it sounded at first like dream time was a collection of fables. But often these stories would be told to explain the present. And so the Europeans began thinking, oh, these are stories about the past, stories about origins, of where everything came from and why things are the way they are today. But as they continued listening, it turned out that the Dreamtime stories were sort of about the past, but they were sort of describing the present and giving another layer of explanation as to what was going on in the present. And they were kind of stories about the future as well. And then as Europeans began to get to know the original Australians better, they learned that there were shamanic practices in Aboriginal Australia that were about perceiving things in the dream time, having contact with dream time, downloading information from dream time. And so bit by bit, the picture emerged that the dream time is not the past. It is an adjacent dimension that touches on the past, the present, and the future. Another reality that occupies the same space as us, but operates in a quite different way. It is curiously similar to the belief of the ancient Celtic peoples of Northern Europe. The ancient Celts believed in something called the Seether. And when Christian missionaries arrived and started talking about the kingdom of God, this divine realm that could be reached out and taken hold of, that was invisible, but that could impact the material world, the ancient Celts said, oh yes, we think we have a handle on this. You're talking about the Seether. And that story also appears to be about eternity. But listen more closely and you realize it's not really about past, present, or future. It's about an eternal realm, another dimension immediately adjacent to ours that we don't normally perceive. But the Celts would have spiritual exercises or shamanic practices that enabled people to begin perceiving this other dimension, downloading information from it, and even finding ways to let that other dimension shape our experience here in this material world. So the Seether, the dream time, all talk in terms that we can now begin to understand when we think in terms of parallel universes operating at a frequency that is out of phase with our own. And that is why when you go to shamanic practices, they seek to perceive these other dimensions through an altered state of consciousness, somehow altering the frequency of our brains and our own consciousness so that we can perceive these other things. And if you listen to Plato talking about the effect of the tea ceremony they did in ancient Greece, the Kaikion ceremony, if you talk to people who've been to Amazonia and done tea ceremonies there, listen to the stories they tell, and it seems that by an altered state of consciousness, they begin perceiving the same thing as one another, which is another layer of reality, another dimension of experience, a dimension in which other experiences and other entities can contact and communicate with us. I would love to hear your experience of those things. Have you found other shamanic practices or mystical experiences that have led you to believe there's another realm out there that we can sometimes perceive and that certainly impinges on what goes on planet Earth? This is the story of our ancestors. Do you have any stories like that yourself? Please jump into the comments. I'd love to have a conversation with you. And remember to subscribe and click on the bell, and I'll see you next time.